Today we're going to talk about chicken feed. We're going to talk about making and growing your own chicken feed. So let's get into it. Chicken feed is generally about 1,500 calories per pound. Sometimes it's a little more like 1,550. A chicken is generally going to eat about 1/4 pound of feed a day. That's about 350 or so calories for a day. Most chicken feed has a base mix of corn and soy materials, and we're talking about 80% corn, and 20% soy materials, plus added minerals, maybe some added fiber, and maybe a little added oil or fat for extra calories. If we are using less corn, corn has low protein but very high energy. If we're going lower on corn and instead we're doing something like wheat, barley, oats, we have to up the fat content because wheat, barley, and oats, those kind of things have less calories than corn per pound. So we got to up that by putting something more concentrated, that's a fat or an oil, putting more oils in the chicken feed. And we get that back up to about 1,500. If you're trying to use less soy or no soy at all in your chicken feed, that's tough too. Soy is your highest, is your strongest protein. Your highest concentrated protein is a soy material. So if you're going without soy, you're going to have to use higher protein grains than a corn, something that's higher like your oats, your wheat, barley, rye, but then your calorie content went down as well. So now we might have to mix in more fat or oil of some sort to get the calories back up to that 1,500 or even 1,550 calories per pound of chicken feed, which is kind of our target goal. Now, bearing that in mind, we're going to get started on the basics of chicken feed. An acquaintance of mine, Ricky Kessler, with the YouTube channel Pantry Preparedness, asked a question in one of his recent videos about chicken feed. He was wondering how to formulate your own chicken feed recipes and what makes a better chicken feed versus a lesser chicken feed. It's a really deep question. I've delved so deep into this myself, and I had to make a response to this because I really got some pretty interesting information here. The only hard part is, how do I limit it to just one video? My wife told me I'm not allowed to make this into a lecture. I just did a 2-hour lecture on building soil. That was only supposed to be a 1-hour lecture. It was good, but I'm going to try and keep within the time frame of what most people have to spare. So let's try for 15 minutes. Now, what is in chicken feed? What makes a good chicken feed? Let's start with the generalities here. Let's start off with the generalities of chicken feed. Your standard commercial layer feed, your layer hen ration, is going to be approximately 1,500 calories per pound. $1,500 calories per pound, plus or minus. It can range from about 1,550, which is a pretty hard mix to get usually, down to about a 1,450, which is a little easier. But the standard nutrition makeup, I need to move this. This table is always in my way over there. Our protein factor is going to be generally a 16 or an 18. You could do a 17% too, but it's generally going to be between a 16 and 17%. So, or between a 16 and 18% of total crude protein in the feed, in the mixture. The breakdowns of that, I'll give you in just a minute. Fat, you generally want about 3 to 5% fat. Fiber, you want approximately the same, 3 to 5% fiber as an approximate. Personally, with a lot of my feed mixes, I'll really up that fiber. So we've got protein, fat, and fiber. Those are both very important, and then minerals. Your minerals, this is a very wide blanket term. I'm going to break this down first off and say added minerals, because generally you're going to add minerals and you're going to add them at approximately, for your standard base mineral mix, of about 1% of the total weight of all the other ingredients. So if I add 100 pounds of all my grains and proteins, I'm going to add approximately 1%, 1 pound, 1% by weight of my mineral blend, which is mostly, it's salts, sodium, so it's a salt with your trace minerals. And then calcium is also added to all that, but we're going to get to that. So we're going to do approximately 1% of my mineral salts. That's your standard. Now let's break down the protein. The two most important proteins for your chickens and for most of these animals is lysine and methionine. So with your lysine, we're going to have your lysine and your methionine. Lysine, I want to have approximately 0.5% to 1% of lysine. Really, it's better to get kind of that 0.75 to 1% ratio. So I'll give you a better number. Let's say 0.85 approximately, or between, let's say this, between 0.75 and 1.0% of the total feed to be lysine, which makes up 16 to 18% of the protein. But of the total feed and of just the protein, usually you want approximately 5% of just the protein, 5% of the protein to be lysine. Methionine, we want approximately 0.5% of the total feed to be, of the total here, to be the methionine. We want approximately 3%, I hope you're not getting lost in my drawings, approximately 3% of all the protein total to be this methionine. So that's actually, it's a hard number to get without getting into a lot of the higher protein things, a lot of the beans, soybeans, peas, that kind of thing. One of my favorites, although it's a little bit tough to get some of these higher numbers, is a good sunflower seed. It's just tough to get some of these higher protein levels. Now, bear with me, I got a lot more numbers to chicken scratch out here. We're going to skip through fat and fiber because basically that's self-explanatory. And we're going to get down to minerals. Your number one main mineral to consider is calcium. Of your calcium, this is the one that we care about because it's eggshell production. Chickens need approximately 4 to 5 grams of calcium in order to make one chicken egg. That's approximately it. And they'll use roughly 50%, 40 to 50% of their intake of calcium is going to go into egg production, which is making the eggshell. So we want to have a total of 3 to 5% calcium in the feed. That's a lot of calcium. That's more than you might think. You got to remember, these chickens are athletes as far as how much production they're giving you, how many eggs they're laying and how quickly. Good large eggs, nice quality eggs. The amount of output that these chickens are creating is basically on par with a high-level athlete, with the amount of output that an athlete would do. So you've got to feed them these high-protein, high-mineral diets to keep up with this. So we've got approximately 1,500 calories per pound of feed, per pound in chicken feed. We need 16 to 18% protein. Anywhere in there will be fine. Older birds and some of the more ornamental type breeds might need a little bit extra protein to lay decently, but on average 16% is our commercial layer feed across most of all of North and South America. We want, of the 16% protein, we want to have about 5% of the protein be lysine, or about 3% be methionine. We want about 0.75% total feed volume by weight to be lysine. We want about 0.5%, maybe a little less is okay, total feed volume to be methionine amino acids from the proteins. We want around 4-ish% fiber and fat. I personally go lighter on the fat and higher on the fiber. It's just the ingredients I have to work with, but that's great. Minerals, you want about 1%-ish, 1% to 0.5% of the total feed to be a salt, a mineral sodium salt, which is dirt cheap to buy. I mean, 10 to 13 bucks for 50 pounds of livestock minerals at any decent livestock store. And then you want your calcium, 3 to 5%, 4% is the standard of total feed weight, 4% of that to be calcium. And I want you to just remember that when you're mixing your ingredients all together or coming up with what's going to work. And I'm sorry I'm throwing so much at you at once, but well, I'm trying to compile 5 years of work into, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes of video. So I'm going to get into a couple more things quickly here. Now, Ricky, you mentioned your chickens seem to go through the more ground, non-pelleted feed, seem to have more waste with that. I'm going to touch on that. So pelleted versus a crumble versus a mash. Oh boy, when I write, I get a lot of stuff on the boards like this. Let me separate those out for you. Does that help at all? Pellets versus crumbles versus mash. Pellets, I'm sure you're familiar with those are. They are highly compressed, finely ground feed. It's been highly compressed, and during that high compression, you actually get a little bit of steam pressure. You get so much pressure, it creates heat, it steams the pellet a little bit, which helps to hold it and stick it together, but that steam also breaks down more of the nutrients to make it easier to digest. So if you take a standard mash, and that's all your ingredients ground up fairly fine, you take that and you pellet it, it's now easier to digest, so generally speaking, you consider it easier to extract the needed calories out of it. It digests a little bit faster. Some ingredients will break down a little bit in that process. However, once you take that material, that loose, fluffy ground material, and you compress it into that hard little pellet, you have a lot less surface area. That significantly less surface area now means you get less oxidation, so you're going to get less breakdown, mainly the oils that are in the grains. Those oxidize the fastest, the oils. You're going to get a lot less slower also of a breakdown of your feed quality, so you're going to retain a little bit more if you're buying bulk feed. If you're buying 6 months worth of feed at once, this actually matters because you'll retain maybe 10% more feed value in 6 months if it was a pellet. You're also going to get less waste generally because it's holding together a little bit better. With the finer ingredients, if it scatters around, it tends to mix in with the dirt, and it's harder to find than a large pellet. The pellets do fall apart when they get wet, but I have found, and I know you mentioned they seem to waste less pellets, I've found the same thing time and time again in my own work and in my consulting. Pellets tend to have less waste as long as you have a feed system that handles them. Crumbles is kind of an in-between. Think more like dog food, the stuff that's extruded. It's not pelleted. Your crumbles are extruded. They're kind of pressured a little bit, but they just kind of, they fall out the end of the crumble machine without being pressed hard into a little cylinder pellets. So it's softer, it's easier for small young birds. That's what crumbles are for more, is for the smaller younger birds. But you're going to get more waste with your larger birds. They're not going to keep the feed value. The integrity of the caloric intake of that feed is not going to last as long as with a pellet. If I have the option, I'll take all my ingredients and I'll pelletize them because pellets last longer and I get less waste with pellets than with anything else. Now, the last part about pellets is you tend to get a little bit more average daily consumption with pellets, and that is because it's compacted down so tightly together that when the chickens eat about all that they're going to eat in a day, usually based on, it's a combination of how hungry they get and how much they can fit in their stomach. They eat till they're full. And if they're eating pellets till they're full, they're going to get, because it's more dense, they're going to get a little bit more calories in them every time they eat. A little bit more of their minerals, a little bit more of their proteins. So generally speaking, a pellet comes out ahead for that reason, and it's very hard to come out better than a pellet. If you have the same ingredients, pelleted and mashed, pelleted wins every time. And it's a fairly significant difference. I mean, maybe a 10% difference, which in the terms of feed is significant. Now the last thing here I'm going to show you I know you mentioned, Ricky, you mentioned about mixing your own feeds together. So, golly, I'm getting too excited. I'm supposed to look at the camera when I'm making YouTube videos. And that is, how do you figure out the blend of ingredients to put together? I'm going to show you this thing. It's called Pearson Square. But I want you to know, I've got a couple little sneaky things on my website, northernhomesteading.com. Go to northernhomesteading.com. Anybody listening to this video, until I edit this out sometime in the future, which I probably will, go to northernhomesteading.com, my blog, and search YouTube membership exclusives. I have a couple pages of really awesome feed information that'll help anyone trying to put together some feed recipes or just understanding dietary needs and feed needs for any livestock. This covers all common farm livestock, and it's just a good starting point with a lot of great information and some alternative feed options. So go to northernhomesteading.com and search YouTube membership exclusives, and you're going to find that. That's a page that's non-indexed, so the search engines don't find it. It's a page that I used to have under password protection, but that always stopped working. So just go to it. Don't tell anybody else. But if you watch this video, go check it out. Now, Pearson's Square. This is how we take ingredients. We can take ingredients, two different ingredients, and mix them together to get a predetermined amount of whatever we're looking for to get out of this. I use this mostly for protein. You can use it for absolutely any aspect of feed. If you want to do iron content, calcium content, magnesium content, lysine content, methionine content, just general protein content. Okay, but let me show you how this works. We're going to start with our square. I'm going to do this for protein. My target protein is 16%, right? 16 in the middle. I'm going to do 2 ingredients at a time with this. Otherwise it gets too tricky. So I'll do 2 ingredients at a time with this. I'm going to do corn and soy because most chicken feed is corn and soy. So let's start simple. Corn, about 8% protein for this. This is one of many of Pioneer Seed Company's number 2 yellow dent corn. I bought 2,200 pounds of this from my neighbor down the street, and I've been fermenting and feeding it to my pigs. This corn is about 8.1% protein, which is pretty good given our season. 8% protein. If I go down to the Cedar Mill and I pick up a bag of roasted soybean, it's about 46% protein. So 8 and 46 in opposite corners, and here's how this works. 16 and 8 and 16 and 46. We do 16 minus 8 equals 8, and I put it in this corner. We do 16 minus 46 equals negative 30. Negatives don't matter, so it's 30. Now here's the awesome part. If I take by weight 30 parts of corn, 8 parts soybean, roasted soybean. Now I have a 16%. So if I take my corn, yes, my soy, I do 46% protein, 8 parts soy, to 30 parts corn by weight is now 16% protein mix. So now I have my 16% protein corn and soy mix. If I want to mix it with something else, I can do that because now I have my 16% corn soy mix. And I can mix it with any other ingredient that I know the protein content for, and I can target a 15%, I can target a 16%, and so on. The point is that way you can work on targeting a very specific value, and you can ration it up pretty easily. The last point I want to make is, Ricky, you talked about growing grains perhaps for chicken feed. I do grow, sometimes I grow more than others in some years, but I grow grains for chicken feed. The most common one that I actually grow is sunflower seed. I grow mammoth sunflower seeds, some of the Russian mammoth. I like Russian gray striped, and any of the Russian black striped or larger seed Russian mammoth sunflowers. I like the ones that have big seeds. The problem is with that, chickens don't always like the big seed, so you might go with a black oil sunflower seed. Black oil sunflower seed has way more oil than any other sunflower seed too. And the oil is how we get our energy content up in chicken feed. Remember that whole 1,500 calories thing for chicken feed that we want to get, 1,500 calories in a pound? Most grains are between about 1,300 and 1,500. So if we have a mix of grains, it's going to tend to be a little bit more like 1,400 calories per pound. That's standard. Once you add your minerals, you might drop down to 1,300 or 1,350. Now we've got to pump it back up to here. The only way we can do that is by adding an oil. I like sunflower oil. I like sunflower seed because a black oil sunflower seed can be 30% or 40% oil in black oil sunflower seed, and it's a high linoleic acid oil. It's a really good oil. Good for you, good for your animals. And the insane extra caloric content, the caloric density in that oil, will pretty quickly pump a 13 or a 1350 calorie per pound feed up to this 15 or even a 1550 calorie per pound feed. So something like that is important as far as balancing out what you have to work with. Now let's talk about grains. Other grains, corn. I talked about my Pioneer corn here, and you can grow a standard hybrid corn just fine. You can get a non-GMO. Technically it is better if it's unsprayed, but I don't have time to get into that. I grow high protein corns. They're lower yielding, higher protein corns. This is early pink and this is atomic orange. Actually, I think both of these would grow decent in your area, Ricky. And they're more cold hardy, they're better in the northern half of the US, and they're high protein. These are more like a 12% protein. So when I'm doing my feed figures and I'm looking at 8% protein around for normal corn, a high protein is considered 10. I'm working with 12. I have worked with 14 in the past, but that one is tricky to maintain and grow. I'm working with more kind of this 12%, between 10 and 12% protein. Now that little difference between 8 and 10% protein is enough to totally change the equation in terms of what ingredients I can use. Generally, feed manufacturers are limited to using mostly just soy because they're using a low protein corn for the most part as their grain. More expensive feeds might use a wheat or some oats and rye even, or a little barley, but that gets very expensive quickly. And if you're going with kind of something cheaper, 8, maybe 9% protein if you're doing real good with your yellow feed corn. But when you get up to a 10 or 11 or even a 12% protein, now you're able to use some of these lower protein ingredients like sunflower seed. Soybean is usually somewhere around 40 or 45% protein for soybean, one or the other. And because we are using such a low quality, a low protein grain, we have to go crazy with this high protein soy to offset it. Nothing else comes as high, no other plant material comes this high in protein other than soybean right now. Nothing else on earth does. But if I can get up to this 10% protein corn, suddenly instead of a 40, 45, or even 46% soy ingredient, now I can look at peas, which are more like a 35% protein. I can look at lentils, which might only be about a 33% protein. I can look at common bean, kidney bean, pinto bean, things that are very easy to grow in your garden, but those are usually only around 27% protein. But as I get higher up protein in my grains, like this 10% to 12% corn that I'm working with, or the equivalent would be oats and wheat, approximately. Oats and wheat are going to usually be between 10 and 12% protein, which is the same as a higher protein corn. The last point I want to make here is just touch on fermenting. Fermenting your grains is a way to take whole grains like my corn, my sunflower seed. It's a way to take these whole grains and break them down so they're somewhat almost pre-digested. They're much easier to digest. They'll digest more efficiently for your animals. and you're going to increase the protein. If you take these grains like corn, being so high in starch, usually I'll get between a 20 and a 30, 20 and 20, 20 and 30% increase of total proteins when I ferment a corn. I have gotten kind of in the higher 33 to 34, almost 35% increase before. But we'll generally see something like this, and corn, all grains are low in lysine and methionine. Corn is incredibly low, so if you're using a corn, which I do like and I recommend growing corn, then you might need to ferment it to get that lysine and methionine content up. If I do that, I can do approximately a 50% increase in lysine and methionine from a good fermentation. Go to northernhomesteading.com and search fermented feeds. Fermented feeds. You'll find multiple articles about that. Everything you might want to know there. So if I take my corn, let's say I start with a 8% corn, and I do this 20 to 30% increase. Now I'm at 10% protein, and the lysine has gone up to approximately 0.5%, which is darn close to that 0.75% that I was targeting in the first place. Now I've got 10% corn with 0.5% lysine, and I needed a 16% feed with 0.75% lysine in it. Now I need much, much, much less soybean or whatever else ingredient to get to that targeted protein level. With my higher protein corns, going with, let's say, a 12% protein, and I'll get a little bit less increase there. I'll get more like a 20% increase. So that's going to be what? Something like a 13.5-ish percent. I don't know. I'm losing my track of numbers. It's getting late. But now I get this higher protein, and my lysine content is going to be closer to this, maybe this. But now we're getting so much closer to that 16% and 0.75, 16% protein, 0.75% lysine. Now I'm able to really use easier to source, easier to grow, easier to find ingredients to get what I need. So I'm going to have to get running. I actually have a pig sitting on my picnic table right now. I slaughtered a few pigs over the weekend. I have one left to butcher, and I got to go cut that up now. So it's already about 9:30 at night, and I still got to edit this video, then cut up a pig. So I'm going to get running. Excuse me. I'll catch you later. And if you watched this far, you're a champ. Thanks. Bye now. Quick little thing. I do have a YouTube membership to my channel. You can join my YouTube channel with a monthly subscription to support my channel and website and what I do. I have 2 levels of YouTube membership for my channel. You can become a homestead friend, and that's $2.99 a month, and that's just to support what I'm doing here on the homestead and with my YouTube channel and my blog. Or you can become a homestead partner, and that's $9.99 a month, and with that you get access to my 25 video course on alternative animal feeds and growing and creating and blending your own animal feeds and just understanding livestock nutrition. So go ahead and consider that. It's probably going to be worth it. You can cancel it at any time. You're totally in charge of that.